She walked into that briefing room with a transfer file and no reputation. Two commanders looked at her and saw exactly what they wanted, someone small enough to use. Colonel Nathan Cross needed a weapon against his rival. Commander Elias Ward needed leverage against his enemy. And Lieutenant Claire Mercer, calm, quiet, unknown, looked like the perfect tool for both of them. They divided her assignments. They contradicted her orders mid-mission. They whispered her name through back channels like she was a commodity being traded. What neither man bothered to ask was simple. Who was she before they found her? They were about to find out, and they were not going to like the answer. If you want to know how this ends, subscribe to the channel right now, because this story is going to go places you didn't see coming. Hit like, drop a comment with your city and country so I can see how far this story has traveled, and don't move, because part 1 starts right now. The briefing room at Black Ridge Naval Warfare Center smelled like stale coffee and old argument. It was a narrow, low-ceilinged space on the second floor of the tactical operations building, fluorescent lights humming with that particular frequency that made your eyes ache after 20 minutes. A long table ran down the center. Whiteboards covered one wall, most of the writing half erased and still readable if you knew what you were looking at. Maps from 3 different theaters of operation were pinned above them in no particular order. A window at the far end looked out over the training range, but the blinds were always half closed, and nobody ever opened them all the way. It was the kind of room where bad decisions were made with complete confidence. Lieutenant Claire Mercer stood near the door with her transfer file tucked under one arm and her cover in her left hand. She was 31 years old, 5'7", with dark hair pulled back tight and the kind of posture that came not from discipline training but from years of holding very, very still. She wore her service uniform without decoration, no ribbons above the breast pocket, no badges pinned to the flap, nothing that would invite a second look. Her file had been carefully stripped of the classifications that would have explained her. She looked, to anyone glancing through the doorway, like a junior officer who had somehow wandered into the wrong building. That was deliberate. She had requested the stripped file herself. 2 men were already inside when she arrived. They were not speaking to her. They were standing at opposite ends of the long table, each pretending to review documents, and the distance between them, exactly half the length of the room, had the quality of something maintained, rather than accidental, like a boundary that had been drawn, redrawn, and finally calcified into something nobody was willing to cross anymore. Colonel Nathan Cross stood at the window end. He was 53, broad through the shoulders, with silver gray hair cut short and a jaw that looked like it had been constructed for the specific purpose of making subordinates uncomfortable. His uniform was immaculate. He wore his career on his chest rows of ribbons, the Combat Action Badge, the Ranger Tab, a Meritorious Service Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. He was the kind of officer who had learned very early that looking the part was at least 50% of doing the job, and he had spent 3 decades perfecting the look. Commander Elias Ward stood at the door end, which meant Claire had to step around him when she entered. He was 47, leaner than Cross, with darker hair, and the particular senseness of someone who had significant time in environments where movement attracted bullets. His uniform was slightly less perfect than Cross's. The second button on his sleeve was at a fractionally different angle, and if you knew to look, you could see the faint ghost of a scar along his left jaw that the lighting caught when he turned a certain way. He wore less hardware than Cross, but what he wore was more specific: the SEAL Trident, an overseas service ribbon with 4 campaign stars, a bronze star with Valor. He looked at Claire when she entered. Cross looked at her 2 seconds later, the half-beat delay suggesting he had been aware of her arrival and chosen to wait before acknowledging it. Neither man spoke first. Claire set her transfer file on the table. "Lieutenant Claire Mercer," she said, "reporting per orders." Cross picked up the file without looking at her and opened it. He spent 45 seconds reading it, long enough to be deliberate, short enough to be dismissive. Then he closed it and set it back down. Your last posting was NSW G2 Support Division, he said. Yes, sir. Administrative. It wasn't a question. He said it the way you'd identify a stain on a piece of fabric. Support functions included administrative duties. Yes, sir. Ward spoke without looking up from his own paperwork. Your marksmanship qualification. Expert, handgun, and rifle. Were certified 6 months ago. Yes, sir. Who ran your qual? Master Chief Donovan, sir. Camp Lejeune range. Ward finally looked up. He had the eyes of someone who had spent years evaluating people through limited information, quick, thorough, unreadable. He looked at her the way you'd check a map before committing to a route. Donovan doesn't pass people who don't earn it, he said. No, sir, he doesn't. A pause settled in the room. Cross reclaimed it. You're here because we have an operational shortfall, he said, pulling a fresh folder from his stack and sliding it to the table's center, close enough for her to reach, but he didn't push it all the way. The Blackridge Tactical Element requires a secondary precision fire asset for the next evaluation cycle. File came across my desk. I made the request. Ward's pen stopped moving. He looked at Cross. You made the request. I did. I was under the impression the request came through the Joint Coordination Committee. The committee agreed with my recommendation. Ward set his pen down. He did it carefully, without sound, which was somehow louder than if he'd slammed it. Colonel, he said, the precision fire asset slot falls under SEAL detachment integration. My operational lane. The evaluation cycle is a tactical division exercise. It's mine. The asset will be embedded with my team during the fieldwork phase, which my division is scoring. They were talking about her like she wasn't in the room. Claire didn't move. She had learned in other rooms in other facilities that this particular moment when two people began using you as a proxy for their actual argument was best navigated by stillness. Motion drew attention. Attention forced resolution. And resolution, in rooms like this one, usually meant someone decided they needed to assert themselves by deciding something about you. So she stood still and let them run out of steam. It took about 90 seconds. Cross picked up her transfer file again, this time handing it directly to her. You'll report to the Tactical Operations section for your initial brief, he said. 700 tomorrow. Get squared away tonight. He left the room without looking at Ward. Ward waited until Cross's footsteps had cleared the hallway. Then he looked at Claire. You understand what just happened, he said. I understand I've been assigned to Blackridge, sir. Don't do that. She met his eyes. He let out a breath, not quite a sigh, more like something being released under controlled pressure. Cross wants a body he can point at my detachment when the evaluation goes sideways, Ward said. He'll give you impossible taskings. He'll document every shortfall. When the score comes back bad, your name is on it, and by extension, my command. Claire said nothing. I need you to understand your actual position here, Ward continued. You're not here because of your qual scores. You're here because somebody needed a placeholder that neither side could easily reject. He paused. Picked you because you're new, because nobody knows you. Because whatever happens, they can explain it away. She picked up the transfer file. Thank you for the candor, sir, she said. She left before he could respond. Her quarters were in Building C, a converted barracks that smelled like industrial cleaner and wood that had absorbed decades of humidity. She had a single room, 8 by 10 feet, with a cot, a metal locker, a small desk, and a window that looked out at a concrete wall. Someone had left a motivational poster on the back of the door, an eagle over a mountain range, with a quote about perseverance. She took it down and put it in the locker. She unpacked in 20 minutes. She didn't have much. A duffel bag of uniforms, a small kit of personal items, a worn paperback she'd been carrying for 2 years, and still hadn't finished. At the bottom of the bag, wrapped in a clean cloth, was a personal item that was not on her official inventory. A small, palm-sized shooter's logbook, its cover worn to gray from years of handling, its pages dense with notations written in a hand so small and precise it looked almost mechanical. Distances, conditions, wind, corrections, 314 entries. She set it on the desk and didn't open it. Through the concrete wall outside, she could hear the range, a slow, rhythmic series of shots, probably a qual group working late. The sound was familiar in the way that things you grew up around become familiar. Not comforting, exactly, just present. She sat on the cot and thought about what Ward had said. Picked you because you're new, because nobody knows you. He wasn't wrong. He just didn't know why it was wrong. 700 brought Cross's briefing room, which was larger than the one from the day before, an actual operations center with projection screens, a tactical display table, and 8 other people arranged around it in a rough hierarchy of rank and relevance. Claire was given a seat at the end of the table nearest the door, which meant something, and everyone in the room knew it. Cross ran the brief with the practiced confidence of someone who had run 1,000 briefs. He moved through the evaluation cycle structure, a 4-week block covering reconnaissance, precision fire integration, hostage rescue protocols, and joint force coordination with the kind of smooth efficiency that made it hard to find anything to argue with. He was good at this. Whatever else he was genuinely competent at the mechanics of command. But twice during the brief, he referred to the precision fire asset without using Claire's name. She noted it. She didn't react. Afterward, a young sergeant first class named Okafor caught her in the hallway. He was 26, maybe 27, broad-shouldered, with the easy movement of someone comfortable in his body. He looked like the kind of person who would be good at things without making a point of it. "You're the new shooter," he said. "Mercer," she said. "Okafor. I'm running the Resi element for the evaluation." He fell into step beside her. "Word of advice, for what it's worth. I'll take it. Don't let them use you as their punching bag," he said. "Cross and Ward, they've been at this for 2 years. Before you, it was a captain named Reyes. Before Reyes, it was a staff sergeant named Park. Both of them requested transfers inside 6 months." He paused. Park went first, took a medical profile on his shoulder. Wasn't his shoulder that was the problem. Claire glanced at him. "How long have you been here?" 11 months. "How do you manage it?" Okafor smiled a real smile, slightly tired around the edges. "I stay in my lane and I do my job so well they can't touch me." He shrugged. "Some days that's enough." She nodded. "Some days," she said. The first week was designed to frustrate her. She understood that fairly quickly. Cross assigned her to the range qualification cycle, a legitimate training block, technically, but one she'd already completed at a higher standard than Black Ridge required. She went through it anyway. She shot well. Not so well that it looked like a performance, but consistently well enough that the range NCO, a laconic master sergeant named Greer, who clearly had strong opinions about his range and very little interest in command politics, started watching her more carefully by day 3. On day 4, Cross modified her assignment. She was now required to complete the qual cycle while simultaneously cross-referencing the evaluation scoring matrices for accuracy. Administrative work, the kind that ate your afternoons. Ward, meanwhile, started appearing at the range. He didn't speak to her directly. He observed. He took notes. He spoke quietly with Greer after her sessions. On day 6, he walked up beside her at the firing line. She was between strings, checking her natural point of aim, letting the rifle settle. "Your dope book," he said. "You keep it." She didn't look up. "I keep a log." "Show me." She paused for one breath, then reached into her kit and handed it over. He opened it, looked at the first few pages, flipped forward. His expression didn't change much, but something in his posture shifted slightly. Slightly, the kind of shift that happens when what you're looking at is more than you expected. He handed it back without a word and walked away. That evening, she received a new assignment appended to her orders. She was now additionally required to audit the SEAL detachment's weapons maintenance logs. Cross's work, almost certainly. Ward's response would come within 48 hours. It did. Ward submitted a formal request to have her integrated into the detachment's pre-evaluation rehearsals, a request that, on paper, was reasonable and operationally justified. Cross denied it on a technicality. Ward revised the request. Cross found another technicality. Back and forth, each exchange generating paperwork, each piece of paperwork landing somewhere in her official record. By the end of the second week, she had accumulated more administrative documentation than most lieutenants generated in a year. None of it was damning. All of it was noise. She went to Okafor's workspace one evening and found him cleaning his kit at his desk. "It's accelerating," she said. He didn't look up. They do that when they can feel the evaluation getting close. He held a radio up to the light, inspecting the contacts. 2 more weeks. They'll peak in the middle of week 3, then Cross will try to establish the narrative and Ward will try to blow it up. He set the radio down. Standard playbook. How do you know the playbook? Park told me before he left, and Reyes told Park. He finally looked at her. Gets passed on, like hazing. She sat on the edge of his desk. What happened to Reyes exactly? Okafor was quiet for a moment. Cross gave Reyes a tasking that required 2 people and a 12-hour window. He gave her 4 hours and no support. When she couldn't complete it, the documentation said she had failed to manage her resources effectively. He picked up the radio again. Reyes was one of the best junior officers I've seen. She's in a supply billet in Virginia now. Claire looked at the concrete floor. And Park? Ward used Park as a rehearsal participant without logging the tasking. When something went wrong with the rehearsal, nothing major, a comms failure Park was listed as the primary cause. He paused. Park had a commendation pending. It was withdrawn. Silence settled in the room. Outside, the range had gone quiet for the night. "Why are you still here?" Claire asked. Okafor's expression didn't change, but his hands stopped moving. "Because somebody has to be," he said. 3 began on a Tuesday with rain. Not the light, workable kind, the heavy, persistent kind that reduced visibility and made the clay on the eastern range turn into something between mud and concrete, depending on the time of day. The evaluation rehearsal schedule had been posted the night before, and Claire had reviewed it 3 times before sleeping, not because she didn't understand it, but because she was looking for the seam. There was always a seam. Cross had built the live fire rehearsal schedule with himself as the scenario controller. Ward was listed as the assault force commander. Claire was listed simply as precision fire attached. Attached, not integrated, not assigned, attached. A word that meant she was close enough to be useful but far enough to be expendable. The scenario saw was a simulated hostage rescue at a range facility, 3 kilometers from the main building. A target structure, a shipping container modified, with windows and interior partitions, had been set up on an elevated plateau at the range's eastern edge. The scenario called for a precision overwatch position on a ridgeline 400 meters to the northwest, with the assault force hitting the structure from the south, while the sniper maintained coverage of the primary approach and 2 designated target windows. On paper, it was a reasonable scenario. The seam was in the communications plan. Claire noticed it during her 3rd read of the rehearsal order. The communications architecture had 3 radio nets, assault force, command, and a 3rd net listed as fire support coordination. The fire support coordination net had 2 frequencies, primary and alternate, but the alternate frequency was the same as the assault force primary. In a real operation, that created a deconfliction problem. If assault force traffic and fire coordination traffic crossed on the same freq, you got garbled comms at exactly the moment when clarity was most critical. She brought it to Cross's operations sergeant the morning of the rehearsal. The alternate freq on the fire support net conflicts with assault primary, she said, laying the order on his desk. If I need to shift to alternate, I'll be transmitting on the same frequency Ward's team is using. Operations sergeant, a master sergeant named Tillis, competent, careful, clearly tired, looked at the order for a long moment. I'll flag it, he said. When today? He didn't flag it. She checked before stepping off for the range. She brought her own backup plan, which was not particularly complicated. She would monitor both frequencies simultaneously using a dual-channel setup on her radio, and she would not transmit on fire support alternate unless there was no other option. Comms went bad, she would default to visual signals with the assault element. It wasn't elegant, but it would work. The rain picked up by 1,300, and by 1,430, the start of the rehearsal window, it had settled into the kind of steady curtain that made range optics functionally useless beyond 300 meters, unless you were running quality glass. And you knew how to use it. Claire knew how to use it. She moved to the ridgeline position 40 minutes early, which was her preference. She never went to a firing position, cold if she had time to avoid it. She set up behind a natural rock formation that gave her a stable left shoulder support and kept the rain off the objective lens without requiring any additional concealment material she'd have had to carry up. She ranged the target structure 387 meters, slightly downhill, minimal crosswind at her position, but she accounted for the valley effect that would push the wind in unpredictable directions across the lower ground. She settled in and watched. The target structure sat quiet in the rain. The assault force was staging 900 meters to the south, out of her line of sight. Cross was in the command vehicle, another 500 meters back from that, running the scenario through the radio. At 1,500, Cross came up on command net. Execute Phase 1. Assault element. You have authority to begin your approach. Ward's voice, flat and efficient. Copy. Moving. Claire tracked the eastern window of the target structure. The scenario called for 2 role players inside acting as hostile elements, with a third acting as the hostage. They'd been inserted 90 minutes before she arrived. She'd been briefed on their positions and their scripted movements. What she had not been briefed on was the fourth person. She saw the movement first, a heat signature barely visible through the rain, tucked low behind the target structure on the western face. Not in any scripted position, not wearing the orange identification vest the role players used. Keyed her radio command net. Overwatch to command. I have an unidentified person on the western face of the target structure. Not wearing ID, not scripted. A pause. Cross came back. Overwatch, that's a role player repositioning. Disregard. Kept her scope on the figure. The movement was wrong. Not the movement of someone who had been briefed to reposition it, was the hesitant, low-profile movement of someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who hadn't expected to have a scope on them. Command, the movement pattern is inconsistent with a scripted role player. Request you verify positioning of all role players before the assault element closes on the structure. Overwatch, I said disregard. You are here to observe the primary windows. Do your job. She took a breath. She moved her scope to the primary window, and then she moved it back to the western face. The figure had shifted position closer to the corner of the structure now, which put them directly in the path of the assault element's approach route. Ward's team was 400 meters out, moving fast through the rain. Couldn't see the western face from their angle. Keyed the radio again this time, on the fire support net, primary. Overwatch to assault element. I have an unidentified individual on the western face of your structure. Position your approach or challenge before you close the final 200. Ward came back instantly. Copy Overwatch. Say position. Western face low, within 2 meters of the southwest corner. Moving slowly, no identification. A pause 3 seconds, which in tactical time is a long pause. Assault element. Halt. Challenge position. Claire watched through her scope. The assault element stopped. Ward's lead man put out a hand signal. Someone to challenge, she could hear the distant rain-muffled sound of a voice carrying across the open ground. Figure on the western face stood up slowly. It was a contractor. A range maintenance worker who had come out to check an equipment issue in the storage area behind the structure and hadn't been cleared off before the rehearsal started. He was wearing a brown jacket. He was frightened. He had both hands up. He was not a role player. He was not hostile. He was a 60-year-old man named, as she would later learn, Dennis Caulfield, who worked for the base facilities contractor and had simply done his job without knowing the rehearsal was running. Ward's team talked him down in 90 seconds. No one was hurt. The rehearsal was paused. Cross came up on command net. His voice, when it came, was carefully, dangerously calm. Overwatch, you transmitted on assault element frequency without authorization. She said nothing for a moment. My transmission was routed to fire support primary, sir. The frequency conflict I flagged this morning placed both nets on the same channel. The assault element received my warning because of the conflict you were informed about. A very long pause. We'll debrief at 1700. Understood, sir. She maintained her position until the assault element stood down. Then she broke down her setup and walked the 3 kilometers back in the rain. She wasn't angry. She wasn't satisfied. She was tired in the way you get tired when you have done your job correctly. And you already know that this will not be the version of events that gets written down. 1630. Before the debrief, Okafor found her in the hallway. He looked at her for a moment, then said, Caulfield has a daughter. She's 7. She nodded. Good, she said. She walked into the debrief. The room had Cross at the head of the table, Ward on the left side, 3 operations staff along the right, and a chair at the far end for her. Cross had a printed copy of the rehearsal communications log in front of him. He had highlighted 3 entries in yellow. Hers, Lieutenant Mercer, he said. You transmitted on a restricted frequency without prior authorization. You also delayed your observation of the primary target windows to pursue what you characterized as anomalous movement, which was not within your assigned observation parameters. She looked at him across the length of the table. I transmitted on fire support, primary, sir. The frequency conflict I flagged at 800 this morning resulted in that transmission being received on assault element net simultaneously. I have the flag request documented. Cross's jaw tightened slightly. That conflict was assessed and determined to be acceptable within the scope of the rehearsal. The assessment wasn't communicated to me. Sir, you should have followed up. I did follow up. Master Sergeant Tillis told me he would flag it. I checked before stepping off, and it hadn't been flagged. A beat of silence. Ward had not spoken. He was looking at the communications log, not at Cross, and his expression was unreadable. But his pen was still. He wasn't taking notes, which meant either he had already formed his position, or he was waiting. Cross set the log down. Your actions today introduced unnecessary confusion into a tracing scenario. My actions today prevented an unidentified civilian from walking into the path of a moving assault element that had no awareness of his presence, Claire said. Her voice was even, not aggressive, just factual. The outcome was that the assault element halted, challenged, and identified a contractor who hadn't been cleared from the range. No one was injured. The rehearsal was paused and reset. I understand that's not a clean result, but it's the correct one. Cross looked at her for a long moment. Ward finally spoke. She's right, he said, simply, flatly, without elaboration. Cross turned to look at him. Ward met his gaze. She flagged the comms conflict. It wasn't addressed. She observed an anomaly. She reported it through available channels. The result protected a civilian. A pause. She's right. Cross gathered his papers. We'll revisit the communications plan before the next rehearsals, he said, and ended the debrief. Claire walked back to her quarters in the dark. The rain had stopped. The range was running a night qualification group. She could hear the muffled percussion of shots carrying through the cold air. She sat on her cot. She opened the logbook on her desk and made an entry, not about the day's shoot, but about the communications plan, the failure, the workaround, the result. She wrote it in the same precise, mechanical hand she used for everything. Compact, accurate, without editorializing. When she was done, she closed the book and looked at the wall. 2 more weeks. Cross would try to establish the narrative. Ward would try to blow it up, and somewhere in the middle of that war, the next seam would appear. She intended to find it before they did. What she didn't know, what nobody in that building knew yet, was that in 4 days, the scenario was going to stop being a rehearsal. And everything she had survived up to this point was going to become the least difficult part of her time at Blackridge. 4 days later, a class message came through at 340. Claire was already awake. She had been awake for 20 minutes, sitting at her desk in the dark with a cup of instant coffee that had gone cold, staring at nothing in particular. Sleep had been uneven since Blackridge, not because of anxiety. Exactly, but because her body still hadn't fully adjusted to the base's particular rhythms. The range ran late. The generators cycled in patterns that didn't match anything she'd slept through before. Small things. Enough. She heard the operations building come alive through her window vehicles starting. Boots on gravel, the specific kind of controlled urgency that sounded different from a training call-out. Training urgency was louder. Real urgency was quieter, faster, more deliberate. Like everyone had agreed without saying so, that noise was now a liability. She dressed and was out the door in 4 minutes. The operations center hallway had 6 people in it when she arrived, and 3 of them were on phones simultaneously. Okafor was standing near the communications bay with his arms crossed and the expression of someone who had been woken up mid-dream and was still sorting out which world he was in. He saw Claire and gave a small nod. "What is it?" she said low. "Coming in now." He tilted his head toward the main floor. Flash traffic. Something went sideways at Kellner Forward. Kellner Forward was a temporary operating location. A staging facility about 60 kilometers northeast, used for training rotations, and occasionally for real-world support operations, when the geography was right. Claire had read about it in the base orientation materials. She had not been there. She moved to the edge of the main floor and found a position against the wall where she could see without being in anyone's way. Cross arrived 4 minutes later. He was fully dressed, which meant he'd either been awake or had dressed faster than seemed plausible. He moved directly to the central display table without looking at anyone and pulled up the incoming message on the main screen. Ward came in 30 seconds behind him. He was wearing a different expression than usual, the operational mask, the one that smoothed everything out and made him look like he was made of cooler material than other people. It was a useful face. Claire had seen versions of it on other people who had spent time in places where the wrong reaction at the wrong moment could get someone killed. The message on the screen was short. She was far enough back that she couldn't read it clearly, but she could read the room. Cross read it twice, which told her the first read hadn't fully landed. Ward read it once and was already turning to his communications sergeant. "Get Drummond on a secure line," Ward said. "Right now." The message was this, as she would reconstruct it later from the debrief materials. A hostile actor, a man named Varon, formerly of a regional paramilitaries group, currently unaffiliated, and therefore more dangerous, had taken 6 military personnel hostage at Kellner Forward. He had come in with a small team, hit the facility during a personnel rotation when the security overlap was at its thinnest, and now controlled the northern half of the building, with his own people positioned at 3 internal choke points. He had made one demand, relayed through a hostage's radio: everyone out. All personnel withdraw from a 12-kilometer radius. He would release the hostages in 24 hours. Nobody in the room believed the 24 hours. Cross turned from the display table. "We have a precision fire requirement," he said, to the room in general, in a voice that made it clear he was speaking to one specific person. Overwatch capability. Long range. He wasn't looking at Claire. He was looking at the display table. Ward was already looking at her, pushed off from the wall. "What's the geometry?" she asked. Cross finally turned. "Excuse me? The facility. Approach angles. Elevation. Structural layout. What's the geometry?" A pause. Cross looked at her the way people look at something that is spoken when they weren't expecting it. "We're still pulling the site plan," he said. "Then I'll wait," she said, and moved toward the planning table. Cross and Ward arrived on opposite sides of the table, 15 seconds apart. The site plan came up on the secondary screen, a bird's-eye rendering of Kellner Forward. Kellner Forward, color-coded by section with the current hostile positions overlaid in red based on the initial report. 3 hostiles confirmed inside. Varen's position unconfirmed, but assumed to be in the command section. 2nd floor, northern half. 6 hostages distributed across 2 rooms. One room had a window facing northeast. The other had a window facing west. Claire looked at the northeast window. She looked at the terrain overlay. She looked at the elevation lines east of the facility. "There's a ridgeline 800 meters out on the northeast axis," she said, tracing the contour line with one finger. "Elevation advantage of approximately 40 feet above the 2nd floor. Line of sight to the command section window is unobstructed if the approach uses the draw here." She pointed to mask movement from the facility's north face cameras. Silence. She looked up. Ward was watching her. His expression had not changed, but his stillness had a different quality now, the kind of stillness that meant he was recalibrating. Cross said, "That analysis assumes the window gives us a clear angle." "It's an assumption." "Yes," she said, "which is why I need the interior layout and current confirmed hostile positions before I commit to a position." "You're not committing to anything yet," Cross said. "This is preliminary." "Then let's make the preliminary useful, sir." Another pause. Ward cleared his throat. "The northeast ridgeline is viable," said, not looking at Cross. "I've run approaches in that terrain before. The draw she's describing it works." Cross looked at the map. He picked up a red marker and made a note on the acetate overlay, which was something he did when he wanted to look decisive without actually deciding anything. Then he capped the marker. "I want a full options brief in 30 minutes, he said. "Ward, your team on standby." Mercer, he paused on her name, just slightly, like he was still deciding whether to use it. "Be ready." He moved toward the communications bay. Ward looked at the map for another few seconds, then looked at Claire. 800 meters, he said quietly, in variable morning light. "Through a window that may or may not be open. The range isn't the problem," she said, equally quiet. "What is?" She looked at the northeast window on the site plan, making sure we know exactly who's standing at it before anyone makes a decision. Ward nodded once. He left without further comment. 30-minute brief became 45 because the secure line to Kellner Forward, Ward's surviving senior NCO, a staff sergeant named Holloway, who had managed to get himself into a maintenance closet with a field radio, kept dropping out. The signal was marginal. Every time they got a clear transmission, they extracted what they could before the static swallowed it again. What they had by the end: 6 hostages in 2 rooms, 3 confirmed hostiles with weapons, Varen's position likely but unconfirmed in the command section, and a demand timeline that the surviving site commander, calling in from outside the building, assessed as non-credible. Varen's group had a history of using negotiation windows as exfiltration cover. The 24 hours almost certainly wasn't 24 hours. More likely 6 to 8, once he had what he needed from the facility's communications equipment. Cross ran the options brief at 510. Option 1, full assault. Breach from south, neutralize. Option 2, negotiate to delay. Reposition forces, assault when favorable. Option 3, precision intervention at range, creating an opening for a compressed assault. Option 3 required one thing that options 1 and 2 did not: a confirmed line of sight shot at Varin, or at a hostile element positioned at the command section window. Sufficient to initiate a controlled cascade, meaning that the shot created enough disorientation inside the building that the assault team could breach and clear before the remaining hostiles could execute whatever contingency plan Varin had in place for this scenario. Everyone in the room understood that option 3 was the most surgical and the highest risk simultaneously. The shot was wrong target, wrong moment, wrong reaction. Inside, you didn't get a second attempt. The hostiles would execute and move. Cross outlined all 3 options with the measured, even tone of someone who had thought through them carefully. Then he looked at Ward. Option 3 requires your team for the breach element. My team is ready, Ward said. It also requires a precision asset capable of an 800-meter cold shot at a partially obscured target through variable light conditions. He paused, with a 30-second breach window after the shot. 30 seconds. Time between a shot landing and Ward's team needing to be through the door. Ward looked at Claire. Cross did not. I'm capable of the shot, Claire said to Cross directly because he needed to be the one to hear it. Cross looked at her. You've never performed in a live operational environment, he said. Your record. My record was stripped to your access level, sir, she said. What's in the file you have is what I requested be shown. The room went quiet in a specific way. Cross stared at her. Ward, across the table, had gone very still. What does that mean? Cross said. It wasn't quite a question. It means the file you have isn't complete, she said. And I'm not going to stand here and prove a negative in a 30-minute planning window when there are 6 people in a building 60 kilometers from here. You can run the enhanced background after. She held his gaze. Right now, you need an answer. I'm giving you one. Cross looked at the map. He looked at Ward. Ward said nothing. Expression said enough. Option 3, Cross said. Contingent on a final confirmation of Varin's position before the shot. Can't confirm, we go to option 2. He rolled the acetate. Wheels up in 20. The vehicle convoy to Kellner Forward took 41 minutes in the pre-dawn dark. Claire rode in the second truck with Okafor and 2 members of Ward's team, a senior chief named Brask and a petty officer first class named Delgado. Neither of them spoke to her directly during the ride, but they weren't hostile. They had the focused, inward quality of people running through their own mental checklists, and they tolerated her presence the same way. Experienced operators tolerated most things by assessing it once and then getting on with business. Okafor sat beside her and looked out the window. Halfway there, without looking at her, he said, "The file thing." "Don't," she said. He nodded and went back to looking at the window. She spent the ride checking her equipment. The rifle was a 0.338 Lapua precision system she'd pulled from Blackridge's armory, not her preferred platform, which was elsewhere and not currently accessible, but a capable one, and she had logged 15 rounds through it on day 2 of her assignment. Enough to know its particular character, it ran slightly hot in cold air, which meant she needed to account for a small velocity variance on the first shot after a cold chamber. The optic was glass, she trusted. The suppressor was mounted and verified. She had 4 rounds in the magazine and 1 in the chamber. She hoped she needed one. They staged 4 kilometers short of Kellner Forward, in a low area behind a tree line that kept them off any visible horizon. Cross set up the command element in the lead vehicle. Ward briefed his team 50 meters away in the dark, voices low, the sound of equipment being checked and adjusted, carrying softly through the cold air. Claire and Okafor moved to a position on a small rise at the edge of the tree line where they could see the facility's lights in the distance, a ceiling, a smear of yellow-white against the blue-gray pre-dawn. "Radio check," she said. Okafor ran through the nets. Primary command was clear. Fire support primary was clear. He'd rebuilt the comms architecture himself, replacing the conflicted frequency plan from the rehearsal, and he'd done it without being asked, which was the kind of thing that told you everything you needed to know about someone. "I've got Holloway on a third net," Okafor said. "He's been running intermittent since 400. If his battery holds. Can he see the command section?" He said he has a partial view through a ventilation grate. "Limited, but partial. Tell him I need to know the moment anything moves in that room." Already told him. She looked at him. He shrugged. "You were going to ask." She went back to looking at the facility. Ward appeared beside her without sound, which she noted and didn't react to. "We have a vehicle update from the site perimeter team," he said. "One additional vehicle behind the north face. Could be an exfil package. Process that." "He's not waiting 24 hours, she said. "No. How long do you think we have?" Ward looked at the facility. "That's his exfil. He's probably waiting for light. Early light before the perimeter response can fully assemble. Maybe 90 minutes. She nodded. He started to leave, then stopped. "The file," he said. She kept her eyes on the facility. "Not now. I'm not asking for details," Ward said. "I'm telling you, whatever's in that file, it doesn't change my team's red. You spotted Caulfield in the rain at 400 meters through a low-visibility scope. You flagged a comms conflict that 3 people missed. You read that site plan in 90 seconds. A pause. My team's done the math." She said nothing. Ward walked back toward his element. Okafor glanced at her sideways. "He likes you," he said. "He respects my utility," she said. "That's different." "Maybe," Okafor said. "You say that like it's a worse thing." At 547, Holloway came up on the third net. His voice was compressed and rough, barely audible over the grate's ambient noise, but the message was clear. Vern was in the command section. Holloway had eyes on him through the grate, partial view, enough to confirm. He was standing near the northeast window. He had a radio in one hand. The other hostile in the room was positioned at the interior door. Claire was already moving. She covered the 40 kilometers to the northeast ridgeline in 38 minutes, moving with Okafor at a pace that was not quite running, but was faster than any reasonable person would have called a walk. The draw she'd identified on the site plan worked exactly as she'd assessed. The approach was dead. Ground from the facility's north cameras all the way to the base of the ridge, and then the ridge itself provided cover as she climbed to the crest. She settled in at the top with 17 minutes of pre-dawn light, that particular quality of gray that was better than darkness. Objects had shape, but worse than true light, because there was no predictability to the shadows. 812 meters to the command section window. She ranged it twice. The window was partially open. Not wide 3, maybe 4 inches of gap at the bottom of the frame. Enough. She built her position carefully. Left elbow support on the rock. Rifle angled down at approximately 6 degrees, a slightly awkward angle, but the ridge's crest gave her no better option without exposing her silhouette. She adjusted her natural point of aim. Let the rifle settle. Breathed. Let it settle again. Okafor was 3 feet to her right, on the radio, maintaining contact with Ward and Cross simultaneously. "Assault element is at the south breach point," he said quietly. "On your mark. Tell Ward 30-second hold after the shot. Do not breach until he hears the shot." Okafor relayed it. She looked through the optic. At 812 meters in early gray light, the window was a rectangle of slightly lighter darkness within the dark mass of the building. She could see interior light, artificial, yellowish. She could see movement. She needed more. She waited. 2 minutes. 3. The interior light shifted someone moving, a shadow crossing and recrossing the window frame. Then Varin moved to the window. He was tall. That helped. He stood in the window gap, with the radio pressed to his ear, looking out at the pre-dawn terrain, looking, she thought, at his exfil vehicle, running his own timeline in his head. She acquired him in the scope. Her breathing slowed, without her telling it to. She ran the correction, 812 meters, slight right to left wind at her position. Negligible at mid-range based on the stillness of the tree line, she could see to the south, the cold chamber variance she'd already calculated. The window gap was tight. She needed him still for approximately 2 seconds, long enough to confirm position, acquire the shot, and break the trigger without anticipation. He was still. 1 second. Something moved in her peripheral vision. Not at the window. Inside the room. Deeper. She tracked it, a fast, instinctive shift of the scope, maybe 4 degrees left of Varen's position. A second figure. Not the hostile at the interior door. A third person, moving toward the window from the back of the room. Processed it in less than a full second. The third figure was moving fast, low, toward Varen's position, not the movement of a hostile running a contingency, but the desperate, low-profile scramble of someone trying to get away from something. A hostage. Someone from one of the holding rooms had broken free or been moved, and now they were in the command section, and they were between her shot and the wall. Her finger was on the trigger. Her natural point of aim was on Varen. If she took the shot right now, the ballistic path cleared Varen's position cleanly. But the hostage's trajectory, if they kept moving at the same rate in the same direction, put them 3 feet behind Varen in approximately 4 seconds. Pulled her finger off the trigger. Okafor heard the quality of her silence change. "What?" he said very quietly. "Third person in the command section," she said. "Moving." She heard Okafor key the radio. She heard him speak, low and fast, to Warden Cross simultaneously. Kept watching. Varen had not moved from the window. The hostage, she was nearly certain now, from the movement pattern, that it was a hostage had stopped. They were down behind something, a desk or a filing cabinet, not visible anymore, but their last tracked position put them in the ballistic concern area. Okafor came back. "Cross says take the shot. Ward says hold." She said nothing. "Mercer," I heard. "What are you doing?" She watched the window. Varen's radio crackled. She couldn't hear the transmission, but a slight shift in posture, his head turning fractionally toward the interior door. Something had changed in his timeline. She keyed her own radio. "Holloway," she said. "Third net. Can you see the command section floor?" Static. Along 3 seconds. Then Holloway's voice, barely audible. "Negative great angle. I can see the window side only. Is there a desk or cabinet in the southwest corner of the room?" More static. Filing cabinet gray. Left of the... "Yeah." "Is there anyone behind it right now?" The longest pause yet. "Then yes. One of ours. Caucasian female, dark hair. Crawled in maybe 2 minutes ago. I don't know how she got loose." Claire pulled back slightly from the scope. She looked at the building. She looked at the window. She thought for exactly 3 seconds, which was all the time Shai had. And then she made a decision that Cross had not sanctioned, and Ward had not suggested, and nobody in the planning brief had anticipated. Heed the command net. Overwatch to command. "I am not taking the shot." Cross came back immediately, and the control in his voice, which was usually absolute, had developed a fracture. To "Lieutenant, you have a confirmed target in the window. You are authorized. There is a hostage in the ballistic path. I am not taking the shot." She was already moving, pulling back from her position, shifting the rifle. "Tell Ward's team to stand by. I need 4 minutes." "You do not have 4 minutes. Mercer, stand by for minutes." Pulled off the net. Okafor stared at her. "What are you doing?" he said for the second time. This time it wasn't a check, it was a genuine question. He wanted to know. She looked at the terrain between the ridge and the facility's northeast corner. She had studied approach and a site plan, and she had studied it again on the vehicle ride, and she had run it in her head 3 times on the climb to the ridgeline for reasons she hadn't fully articulated even to herself. Now she knew why. "I'm changing the problem," she said. She was already moving. She moved down the ridge the wrong way. Not back the way she'd come the draw, the covered approach, the safe route. She went northeast instead, cutting across the open face of the ridge at an angle that kept her below the crest line and out of the facility's camera coverage, moving fast and low through scrub grass that was wet from the night and grabbed at her boots with every step. The rifle was slung across her back. Both hands were free. She needed both hands. Okafor came after her without being told to. He was breathing harder than she was by the time they hit the base of the ridge, which she noted without comment. He was fit. The terrain was just uneven, and the pace was unforgiving, and neither of them had slept enough. "You're going to explain this to me," he said, keeping his voice down by instinct. "Northeast corner of the facility has a secondary access point," she said, moving. "Maintenance entry. Holloway mentioned it in his second transmission. He said that's how the hostile team came in. Small entry, recessed, not covered by the primary camera array. You're not going in? I'm not going in. Then what? There's a generator housing 12 meters from that entry point. Holloway described it as an elevated concrete block, roughly chest height. If I can get to it, I have a line of sight into the command section through a different angle. Not the window. The interior partition wall has a gap structural, probably an HVAC access panel that was never properly sealed. Holloway mentioned light coming through it. Okafor processed this while running. That's a 40-meter shot, maybe less. Yes, through a gap in a partition wall. Yes, that you've never seen. Holloway described it. It's enough. He said nothing for 3 full seconds, which was the equivalent of a long argument from Okafor. "And the hostage behind the filing cabinet," he finally said. "At 40 meters, I control the geometry. At 800, I didn't." She paused without stopping. At 800, the margin was the thickness of a bad decision. At 40, the margin is what I put it at. They covered the remaining distance in 11 minutes. The northeast corner of the facility was darker than the rest. The camera array on this face was positioned for a broader perimeter sweep, which created a shadow zone directly adjacent to the building's corner. She had seen it on the site plan as a potential vulnerability and had flagged it mentally and then set it aside because she hadn't expected to need it. Now she needed it. The maintenance entry was exactly where Holloway had described it, a recessed metal door, painted the same institutional green as the rest of the facility's exterior, set back 18 inches into the wall. The lock was a standard key entry deadbolt with a secondary electronic pad that had been disabled pried off, by the look of the frame damage, probably during the initial hostile entry. The door was slightly ajar. She stopped. Okafor stopped beside her. They both looked at the door for a moment. "That's not good," he said quietly. No, an ajar door meant someone had come through recently and hadn't secured it behind them, or the hostile team had left it as a quick exit option. Either way, it meant the approach to the generator housing wasn't as clean as she needed. She looked at the gap between the door and the frame. Darkness inside. No sound. She looked at the generator housing, a gray concrete block, chest high, positioned against the building's north face 12 meters from the door, exactly as described. From the housing's right side, the angle would cut through the corner of the building, and if Holloway's description of the partition gap was accurate, into the lower section of the command section's interior space. She needed to get to the housing without going through the door. The ground between her position and the housing was open, 8 meters of gravel and dirt service corridor running along the building's north face. Exposed from the door, exposed from a window she couldn't currently see the interior of. She looked at the window. Second floor, northeast face. One pane of frosted glass, likely a bathroom or utility space, adjacent to the command section. Not clear. No direct line of sight from inside that window to the service corridor below. She moved. She crossed the 8 meters of open ground in a low, fast traverse, staying close to the building's face, reaching the generator housing in less than 5 seconds. She pressed against its eastern side, breathing controlled, listening. Inside the building, muffled, coming from the floor above, she could hear voices. Not words. Tone. The tone of people giving orders, which was different from the tone of people receiving them, and different, again, from the tone of people doing nothing. Varen's timeline was moving. She unslung the rifle and settled into the position on the housing's right side, using the concrete block as a rest. Angle was tight. She was looking up at roughly 15 degrees, not ideal, but manageable. The gap in the partition wall was a horizontal slash of interior light at the upper edge of her visual field. From this position, exactly where Holloway had said. She ranged it through the scope, 38 meters. The gap itself was approximately 4 inches high and perhaps 14 inches wide. Through it, she could see the lower portion of the command section's interior, a desk, a section of flooring, the base of what looked like a radio rack, and the lower half of 2 standing figures. Boots and legs. One pair of boots facing the window. One pair facing the interior door. She could not see the hostage's position from this angle. She needed someone to move. She keyed the third net, keeping her voice at almost nothing. Holloway, still with me? A pause, static. Yeah. I need you to do something. This is important. The hostage behind the filing cabinet, can you make any sound that would cause that person to move toward the exterior wall? Not the window wall. East wall. Silence. I'm in a maintenance closet. If I make noise, I know the risk. Can you do it? Another pause. The heating duct runs above me. I can hit it. Do it in 30 seconds. Tell me when. She heard Okafor come up quietly beside her. He'd taken a position 6 feet back, watching the maintenance door and the perimeter approach simultaneously. His radio was running all 3 nets. He had the expression of someone who had committed to a course of action and was now doing the job of not second-guessing it. She settled back into the scope. 20 seconds. 30. A sound came through the ceiling, a hollow metallic bang, the kind that could have been the building's plumbing or structural expansion or any number of things. Not loud, but present. Inside the command section, both pairs of boots shifted. Figure facing the window turned. The figure at the interior door stepped 2 paces forward, and the hostage she saw the movement before she fully registered it. A small, scrabbling shift along the base of the east wall moved. Fast, low, east, out of the line. She had maybe 2 seconds of geometry. The figure facing the window stepped back toward it, Varen, completing a movement she'd interrupted the tail end of, and his upper body crossed through her limited visual field, and she had not a great shot, but a workable one. A shot that put the round in the lower thoracic region, non-lethal if treatment was immediate, incapacitating now. She didn't take it. She took the shot that was actually available, a foot lower, his left leg, specifically the upper thigh. The round would hit the femur. He would go down. He would not be a threat. He would not die from it with any kind of reasonable response time. She took it. The suppressed shot was still loud at 38 meters. A compressed crack that bounced off the concrete housing and the building's face and scattered into the pre-dawn air. Not silent. Quiet enough. The boot on the left dropped. She was already keying the command net. Overwatch to command. Shot fired. Varen is down, non-lethal, command section. Breach now. A half-second of silence. Then Ward's voice, flat and immediate. Breach. She heard the south door blow a fast, controlled explosive charge, the kind that took a door off its frame in a fraction of a second, and then she heard boots and movement and Ward's team. Doing what Ward's team did, which was clear a building with a speed and precision that made it look simple and wasn't. 41 seconds. That was how long it took. She counted it from the breach charge to the all-clear call, standing at the generator housing with rifle still up, monitoring the maintenance door and the north face for secondary threats that never came. 41 seconds, and then Ward's voice on the command net, all clear. 6 hostages secure. 1 hostile down, command section, ambulatory wound. 2 additional hostiles in custody, south corridor. 1 hostile fled via the maintenance entry. We have footprints, no visual. She lowered the rifle. 1 had gotten out through the maintenance door. That was the ajar door. That was someone who'd been watching for an exit and had taken it the moment the breach charge went off on the south side. Not a perfect result. She thought about Okafor's words from the night before. Some days that's enough. She looked at the door. Tell Ward there may be a track going northeast from the maintenance entry, she said. Single set of boots, probably running. Okafor was already relaying it. She unslung the rifle and walked back toward the corner. Cross was at the facility's south entrance when she came around the building. He had arrived in the command vehicle, which was now parked on the access road, and he was standing beside it with his arms at his sides and the expression of someone who had been preparing one conversation and had just discovered they needed a completely different one. Ward was inside, managing the hostage medical checks and the custody processing. Cross looked at Claire. She stopped 6 feet from him, rifle slung, face neutral. He said, "You pulled off the net." "Yes, sir." "You abandoned an authorized firing position." "I repositioned to a more effective angle given changes in the target environment." "I had not authorized a repositioning." "No, sir, you hadn't." He looked at her for a long moment. The facility behind him was alive, with movement now medical personnel coming through from the staging area. Ward's team moving in and out with the processed hostiles, 2 vehicles running their engines on the access road. The sun had broken the horizon, finally, and the early light was doing what early light did to everything, making it look both better and more consequential than it had looked in the dark. "You had a clear shot," Cross said. "You had authorization. You had a confirmed target. I had a compromised geometry and a hostage in the ballistic concern zone," she said. "Told you that. You told me you were not taking the shot. You did not tell me you were going to reposition and take a different shot. If I'd told you, you would have ordered me back to the ridgeline." His jaw tightened. "Yes," he said, "I would have." "Then that's why I didn't tell you." She said it simply, without aggression, because it was the truth, and dressing it up wouldn't make it less true or more comfortable. She wasn't interested in making it comfortable. Cross looked past her at the facility. The first of the hostages was being walked out the south entrance, a young specialist, a woman, dark-haired, moving under her own power, but leaning on Ward's senior chief. She was walking with the particular careful quality of someone who had been waiting to collapse and was choosing not to yet. He watched her. He said nothing for almost 20 seconds. Then, "The shot, sir. You shot him in the leg." "Non-lethal." "Yes, sir. You had a shot at center mass." "Easier. More definitive." She looked at him. "He has people who will want to know where Kellner Forward's communications equipment is," she said. "If he's dead, we don't get that. If he's alive and uncomfortable, we have a better chance." She paused. It was the more useful shot. Cross looked at her. For the first time since she had arrived at Blackridge, something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, not obviously, but shifted in the way that a lock shifts when the right key hits the tumbler. She could see him recalculating. She could see him trying to determine whether what he was recalculating was a threat to him or an asset to him, and she could see the moment he realized he didn't know the answer yet. He said, "My office, 1400. He walked to the command vehicle. Ward's debrief was more useful. He ran it in the facility's south corridor, standing up The 6 hostages present, because the medical team hadn't moved them yet, and because Ward was practical, enough to know that keeping them in the loop was better than letting them sit with their own thoughts. He was thorough and efficient, and he did not editorialize. He stated what happened, in sequence, without embellishment or editorial comment. When he got to Claire's repositioning, he stated it the same way. Precision Asset identified a compromised geometry at the primary overwatch position and repositioned to a secondary firing location without command authorization. The repositioning resulted in a non-lethal shot on the hostile lead, disorientation of the remaining hostile elements, and a successful breach with full hostage recovery and 0 friendly casualties. He paused. The secondary position was identified during the pre-mission planning phase and was not included in the approved options brief. One of the hostages, a sergeant, maybe 30 years old, with a split lip and the swollen eye look of someone who'd been hit in the face at some point during the preceding hours, said, "Who identified it?" Ward looked at Claire. The sergeant looked at Claire. She said nothing. The sergeant nodded. It was a small nod, kind that meant something without requiring elaboration. Ward wrapped the debrief and dismissed the element. As people filed out, Brask, the senior chief, walked past Claire and said, without stopping and without looking at her, "Good work." 2 words. Not loud. Not performed. Just accurate. She watched him go. Delgado, the petty officer first class, was behind him. He also didn't stop, but he caught her eye and gave her the smallest acknowledgement, a slight lift of the chin, barely anything. In the SEAL community, she understood that was close to a speech. Okafor appeared at her elbow. "Cross wants you at 1,400, he said. "I know." "Ward wants you at 1,300. She looked at him. "Ward's going to try to get ahead of whatever Cross is planning," she said. "Probably. And if I go to Ward's meeting, Cross is going to interpret it as me choosing a side." "Also probably." She thought about it for a moment. "Tell Ward I'll see him at 1,400, she said. "At Cross's meeting." Same room. Okafor's eyebrows moved slightly. "You're going to put them both in the same room. They're going to end up there anyway. I'm just going to make it sooner rather than later, so they spend such less time building separate narratives." He looked at her. "You know this is going to be unpleasant." "I know. Like, genuinely unpleasant." "Okafor, yeah? Go eat something. You look terrible." He laughed a short, genuine sound and walked away. She stood in the empty corridor for a moment, alone. Through the facility's exterior wall, she could hear a vehicle engine, the sound of the medical team working, distant radio traffic. Inside, the building had the particular quiet of a place that had been very loud recently and was now catching its breath. She looked at the maintenance entry door at the far end of the corridor. Still ajar, still showing the frame damage from the hostile entry. One had gotten out. She thought about that. The footprints going northeast into scrubland that fed into 3 different road networks within a 2-kilometer radius. Gone by now. Clean exit, probably pre-planned. That bothered her more than the rest of it. Not because of what it meant for Varen's network that was someone else's problem, and they'd handle it, but because it meant the scenario had not been fully resolved. There was a loose thread, and loose threads, in her experience, had a tendency to find things to tangle with. She made a note of it, not in her logbook, just in the organized space she kept in her head for things that weren't finished. The 1,400 meeting started badly and got worse. Cross's office was on the 3rd floor of the main operations, building back at Blackridge, a large room by military standards, with a window that actually opened and a desk that was real wood rather than pressed composite. He had a flag on a stand in the corner, and a framed photograph on the wall that showed him shaking hands with someone more senior, which was the kind of decor that communicated ambition without stating it. He had expected Claire. He had not expected Ward. Ward walked in at 1,359 and took a chair without asking, which Cross couldn't really object to, because the chair was in a guest position and Ward outranked every technical reason Cross might give for not wanting him there. He sat with his arms on the chair's rests, and his posture neutral, the way you sit when you've decided. The room is your room too, and you're not making a production of it. Cross looked at Claire when she entered. She sat in the second chair, equidistant from both of them. Cross closed the door himself. He sat behind his desk. He opened a folder, looked at it briefly, closed it. "I'll be direct," he said. "Please," Ward said. Cross looked at Ward. "This isn't your meeting, Commander. You're going to be talking about one of my detachment's assets in an operational context. It's my meeting, too. She's not your asset. She's assigned to the tactical division. She ran a precision fire operation in support of my team this morning. That makes her my asset for this conversation, whether or not your paperwork agrees." Cross set his hands flat on the desk. Claire watched both of them and said nothing. "The operation this morning," Cross began, "redirecting involved an unauthorized repositioning, an unauthorized shot, a departure from the approved options brief, and a failure to maintain command net communication during the critical phase of execution." He was looking at Claire now. She said, "All of that is accurate. I'm glad we agree. I also want to note that the operation resulted in all 6 hostages being recovered alive, the hostile lead being taken into custody with actionable intelligence potential, and 0 friendly casualties. Outcome doesn't retroactively authorize the method." "No, sir, it doesn't. I violated the communications protocol. I repositioned without authorization. Those are fair criticisms." She paused. "But the reason I repositioned was that the approved method would have resulted in a hostile being killed instead of captured, and a hostage in the ballistic path of the shot during the approved targeting solution. Both of those facts were communicated to command before I repositioned. You communicated that you were not taking the shot. You did not communicate that you were moving. If I'd communicated my movement, you would have ordered me back to the ridgeline. Then what?" The question sat in the room. Cross didn't answer it immediately, which meant the answer he had prepared was not quite adequate for the question as it had actually been asked. Ward said, "Then we'd have taken option 1, full assault from the south. Higher risk, higher noise, lower probability of taking Varen alive. A pause. Probably still successful. Probably." Cross looked at Ward. "You're defending her. I'm describing the alternative outcome. Those are different things. If I defend myself," Claire said, "this becomes an argument. I'd rather give you an accurate accounting and let you draw your own conclusions, sir." Cross looked at her. "The file," he said. "This morning you indicated your record had been stripped. At my request, yes. I want the complete record. You can submit a request through the appropriate classification channels. I'll authorize the release. That takes time." "Yes, sir. I want to know now." She looked at him evenly. "What I can tell you is this," she said. "I spent 6 years in a unit whose mission set I'm not going to describe in this room. The operational environment required long-range precision work in conditions that did not permit a second shot. I completed 314 logged engagements. I have not been in a standard assignment since that unit was deactivated 14 months ago." She paused. "I requested the stripped file because I didn't want my background to be the reason for any assignment decision, good or bad. Wanted to be assessed on what I could actually do in the environment I was actually in." Silence. Ward was looking at her. His face was still. Cross was looking at her differently than he had been. The recalculation she'd seen outside the facility had continued. She could see him weighing it, the operational value against the control problem, because what she was describing was an asset that was significantly more capable than he'd been told he was getting. Incapable assets were useful, but they were also harder to manage, harder to contain, harder to use as pawns. He was realizing, in real time, that he had asked for a placeholder and gotten something else. 314, he said. Yes, sir. Logged. Everyone. Ward exhaled through his nose barely anything, just a small release of something he'd been holding. She didn't look at him. Cross picked up the closed folder, put it down again. The investigation into the unauthorized repositioning will be documented, he said. You'll have an opportunity to provide a written statement. Understood. The statement should include the full reasoning for the repositioning decision, the identification of the secondary position, and the ballistic rationale for the shot taken. I'll have it to you by 800 tomorrow. Tonight, he said. I want it tonight, she nodded. He looked at Ward. The hostile who escaped through the maintenance entry, Cross said. Team is tracking? We have the perimeter team on it. Regional coordination is being notified. Ward's voice was neutral. Being handled. I want to be kept informed. You'll be kept informed. They looked at each other across the desk with the particular quality of two people who had been fighting each other for so long they'd forgotten how to be in a room together without it being a fight. Cross said dismissed. Claire stood. Ward stood. They walked out together, which was not something either of them had planned, but which happened because they were both moving in the same direction, and the door was wide enough for one person at a time, and Ward held it. In the hallway, they walked side by side, without speaking for 30 seconds. Then Ward said, 314. She said nothing. It's not a support division number, he said. No. What unit? She looked at the corridor ahead. The paperwork will say it was a Maritime Special Operations support element. Paperwork is technically accurate and almost completely misleading. Ward absorbed this, and the stripped file was your idea. I needed to know if I could still do the job without the file doing it for me. He was quiet for a moment, and she glanced at him. I can still do the job, she said. They reached the stairwell. Ward's stopped at the door. Cross is going to try to claim the operation, he said. The successful outcome. He'll want it in his command record. I know, and he's going to try to claim you. The capability. He'll want that in his record too. I know that too. Ward looked at her. What do you want out of this? He said. And it was a genuine question, not tactical, not political, just direct. She thought about it for a moment. And I want to write my statement. Go to sleep and find out who Varen's escaped contact is before they become someone else's problem, she said. Ward studied her. That's it? Tonight, that's it. Push the stairwell door open. I'll get you whatever Brask has on the escape track, he said. Give me an hour. He went through the door. She stood in the hallway. Down the corridor, through a window at the far end, the early evening light was doing something complicated with the clouds, a layered, broken light that came and went and made the concrete outside look almost warm. She watched it for a moment. Then she went to find a desk and write the statement. Then she wrote it in 90 minutes. She wrote it in 90 minutes, which was longer than she preferred without being a confession and thorough without being cooperative. And that balance required care. She documented the geometry, the ballistic rationale, the hostage positioning, the communication sequence, the repositioning decision. She wrote it in the same compact, precise hand she used in the logbook. No embellishment, no apology, no mitigation that wasn't factually grounded. She submitted it at 2,140. At 2,155, Okafor knocked on her door. She opened it. He was holding a folded piece of paper, a printed message intercept, she realized from the look of the header. Brask's track team found something, he said. The escaped contact from the maintenance entry. She took the paper. He didn't run northeast, Okafor said. He doubled back. He's been here. At Blackridge. She looked up. Not anymore, Okafor said. He was here long enough to access the external communications relay on the east perimeter. Someone pulled a data package from the tactical evaluation archives. He paused. The package included personnel files. She felt something settle in her chest, not fear, exactly, but the cold, certain recognition of a thing that had been moving toward her for a while and had now arrived. Which files, she said. Yours, Okafor said. Cross's. Ward's. He looked at her. Whoever Varen is working for, they now know everything about the three people who just ran the Kellner Forward operation. She stood in the doorway for a moment. The logbook was open on her desk behind her. 314 entries. She said, "Get Ward." Ward was in her doorway 4 minutes after Okafor left to get him. He had the look of someone who had been moving fast and was now choosing to be still, the controlled deceleration of a person who understood that arriving out of breath communicated something he didn't want to communicate. He looked at the intercept printout in her hand, then at her face. "Show me," he said. She handed it over. He read it, standing in the doorway. His expression didn't change during the reading, which told her he was processing rather than reacting, running the implications in sequence rather than all at once. When he finished, he folded it once and handed it back. "When did the data pull happen?" he said. "The timestamp on the intercept puts it at 2108, she said. 47 minutes ago. Our files. All three. Personnel records, operational assignments, the evaluation cycle documentation." She paused. "My file would have flagged. The access level required would have triggered an alert on the classification system. That's probably how the intercept team picked it up." "Probably," Ward said. "Or they got lucky with the sweep timing." He looked past her into the room for a moment. "Cross know?" "Not yet." Ward nodded slowly. "He's not going to like hearing it from me," she said. "No, and he's not going to like what it means." Ward looked at her. "What does it mean?" he said, not challenging. He wanted her read. She thought about it for a moment, because she didn't like stating things she wasn't certain of, and she wanted to be accurate. "It means whoever Varen is working for didn't send him to Kellner Forward just for the communications equipment," she said. "Or not only for that, they wanted to know who would respond. They wanted to know the response profile, how fast, with what assets, using what methods." She paused. Kellner Forward was an intelligence collection operation dressed as a hostage situation, and we gave them exactly what they needed. Ward was quiet. Outside, somewhere in the base's mid-distance, a vehicle was running idling, which meant it was staged rather than moving. Okafor probably keeping a vehicle warm in case they needed to move. "The shot," Ward said finally, "the non-lethal shot. That's in our file now. Yes. They know we have a precision asset capable of an 800-meter repositioning decision in low light, with the judgment to take a non-lethal option to preserve intelligence value." "Yes, that's specific," he said. "That's not the kind of thing you want a hostile network to have." "No." He looked at the wall. He had the posture of someone doing rapid mental arithmetic on a problem with too many variables. "I need to brief Cross," he said. "Tonight." "We need to brief Cross," she said. He looked at her. "You don't have to be in that room," he said. It wasn't chivalry. It was a practical offer, the understanding that being in that room was going to cost her something. "My file is in the package they pulled," she said. "I'm already in the room, whether I'm physically there or not." He accepted that without argument. "Give me 20 minutes, he said. "Let me get the full intercept analysis from the signals team first. I don't want to walk into Cross's office with a printout and a theory." "I'll be here," she said. He left. She sat down at the desk and looked at the logbook. She turned to the last entry, the one she'd made after the rehearsal debrief. "The communications analysis." She read it once, then turned forward to the next blank page. She didn't write anything. She just sat with the open book and the quiet and let herself think about what the next 24 hours were likely to look like, which was not a comfortable exercise, but was a necessary one. Cross's office at 2300 had a different quality than it had at 1400. The evening light that had made everything look complicated through the corridor window was gone. The overhead fluorescent was on, which was harsher and more revealing. Cross was behind his desk in a different uniform shirt he'd changed at some point, which meant he'd been home briefly, which meant he hadn't been expecting this. The folder from the afternoon meeting was still on the corner of his desk, slightly displaced, like it had been picked up and set down several times. He looked at the intercept analysis in Ward's hand and then at Claire. "Sit," he said. They sat. Ward laid the analysis on the desk. It was 2 pages now. The signals team had expanded it with a technical annotation that confirmed the access method, the data package composition, and a 94% confidence assessment that the pull had been executed by the individual who had exited through the maintenance entry. Cross read it without picking it up. He read it slowly, which he hadn't done with the earlier folder. When he finished, he looked at the far wall. "Varen's network profiled us," he said. "That's our assessment." "Yes, sir," Ward said. "They used a live hostage situation as a collection operation." "The hostage element may also have been genuine," Claire said. "The 2 objectives aren't mutually exclusive, but the data pull on the personnel files suggests the intelligence collection was primary." Cross looked at her. "Your file triggered the alert," he said. "Classification level on the stripped portions would have caused an automated flag when accessed without the appropriate credentials." "Yes, sir." "What's in the stripped portions?" It was the same question he'd asked at 1400, but the room was different now, and both of them knew it. She looked at him. "If I give you an oral summary, it doesn't leave this room without my authorization," she said. "What I'm about to tell you stays here until I say otherwise, or until someone with appropriate authority supersedes me on that." Cross's expression shifted. "You don't set the terms in my office, Lieutenant." "I'm not setting terms. I'm telling you the condition under which I can give you what you're asking for without requiring you to go through a classification request process that takes 3 weeks." She kept her voice even. "If you'd rather do it formally, sir, I'll wait." He looked at Ward. Ward looked at the analysis on the desk. Colonel Ward said, "We have a hostile network with our personnel files and an operational profile of this facility's response capability. Whatever's in our file, we need to understand it tonight." Cross looked at Claire. He said, "Agreed. This room." She nodded. "The unit I was assigned to for 6 years was a classified maritime special operations element operating under a joint authority structure that I'm not going to name," she said. "Our mission set included long-range precision fire in denied environments, personnel recovery, and what was officially designated as high-value activity disruption. Unofficially, we were a small team that went into places where conventional assets couldn't go and resolved problems that couldn't be officially acknowledged." She paused. "We deactivated 14 months ago, following a change in theater priorities. I was given a choice of reassignment options. I chose the support division posting because it was low profile, and I needed time to decide what I wanted to do next." Cross was looking at her with the particular attention of someone recataloguing information in real time. 314 logged engagements, he said. "Yes, sir. All long-range precision. The majority. Some were shorter-range direct action, in support of a recovery element. Unacknowledged operations. Most of them, yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Stripped file, the administrative posting, the qual scores that were just high enough to be notable but not high enough to be suspicious." He said it slowly, working through it. "You built a cover profile. I requested a stripped file. What people inferred from it wasn't my responsibility. You knew what they'd infer." She didn't answer that, because the answer was yes, and saying yes wasn't going to make the conversation more productive. Ward said, "It doesn't matter now. What matters is that a hostile network has her real file, or close enough to it, that they know what she actually is. Which means she's a target." The word landed in the room with a specific weight. Cross looked at the analysis on his desk again. "You think they'll come at her," he said. "Not a question." I think they profiled 3 people tonight, Ward said. 2 of them are base commanders with institutional protection and visibility. One of them is a lieutenant with a classified background and a cover profile that just got burned. He paused. If I were running Varen's network, I know which one I'd go after. Cross picked up the analysis for the first time. He held it, looking at it, and Claire watched him make the transition, the visible, almost physical shift from command politics mode to operational mode. It wasn't a comfortable transition for him. The political mode was where he lived. Operational mode required a different set of skills and a different willingness to commit. But he made it. What do you need? He said. The question was directed at both of them, which was, Claire thought, probably the first time in the history of Cross and Ward's relationship that a question had been directed at both of them simultaneously without an implied hierarchy in the phrasing. I need access to the full intercept package, Ward said. Everything the signals team has on the data pull, the method, and any network indicators that connect it to a broader operation. Done. What else? I need the Kellner forward site commander's full debrief on the hostile team's composition. Specifically, anyone Holloway observed. That wasn't in the initial report. Also done. Cross looked at Claire. And you? He said. She said, I need you to stop the formal investigation into the unauthorized repositioning. Stared at her. That's not a security request. No, sir. But if the investigation proceeds, the documentation creates a discoverable paper trail that confirms, for anyone reviewing it, exactly what I did and how I did it. If Varen's network is building an operational profile on this facility, we shouldn't be generating documents that fill in the gaps they might still have. Cross set the analysis down. He looked at his desk. He looked at the flag in the corner. The investigation, he said, slowly, was procedurally initiated. Stopping it requires a finding that the procedural basis no longer applies. The procedural basis was an unauthorized repositioning in a training context, Ward said. What actually happened was an unauthorized repositioning in a live operational context that resulted in full mission success. Procedural basis has already changed. Cross looked at Ward. You've thought about this, Cross said. I had 20 minutes, Ward said. Another silence, longer this time. Cross said, I'll suspend the investigation pending operational review. That's the most I can do tonight without it. Looking like something it isn't. Suspension is enough, Claire said. He nodded once. I want a joint brief at 600, he said. Full picture. Varen's network, the data pull, threat assessment, and our response options. He looked between them, together, in the same room, working the same problem. Ward said understood. Claire said, yes, sir. Cross looked at her for a moment. The file, he said. After this is resolved, I'll authorize a full release to your level, she said. You'll have everything. He nodded. Get some sleep, he said. Both of you. He picked up his phone before they were out of the room, which meant the next call was already being made. She didn't know who he was calling, and it wasn't her business to know. What she knew was that the call was being made, which was movement, which was the only thing that mattered at 2,300 with a hostile network in possession of her name. She slept 3 hours. It wasn't enough, and she knew it wouldn't be, but 3 hours was what the timeline gave her, and she took it. She was back at her desk by 445, running through the intercept analysis, and the Kellner forward site materials that had arrived in her message queue at 200. Cross had moved fast, which she hadn't expected and which revised her assessment of him slightly. Holloway's full debrief was 40 pages. She read it in 30 minutes, which was possible because she knew what she was looking for, and because Holloway, to his credit, was a precise and organized observer. He described the hostile team's entry, their movements through the facility, their communication patterns. and their behavior during the standoff with the specificity of someone who had been paying very careful attention, because he'd understood that attention might be the only thing he could contribute. On page 31, she found it. Holloway had noted, almost as an aside, that one member of the hostile team, not Varin, not the two who'd been taken into custody, had spent approximately 20 minutes in the facility's communications room before the standby period. He described the individual as tall, moving with precision, wearing a jacket that didn't match the rest of the team's gear. Holloway had assumed it was a technical specialist brought in for the communications equipment access. She looked at the physical description. Then she pulled up the maintenance entry footage that Blackridge's perimeter team had extracted a low-quality IR recording from a camera that shouldn't have been able to see the maintenance entry, but could catch the edge of it at the right angle. She'd requested it at 2,200 the previous night on a hunch she hadn't fully articulated yet. The footage was grainy and the angle was bad, but the figure moving through the maintenance entry at 614, the one who had gone northeast, or appeared to, was visible for approximately 4 seconds before the frame cut. Tall, precise movement. A jacket that sat differently than standard field gear. Communications specialist hadn't been in the facility to pull data from Kellner Forward Systems. They'd been there to set up the pull from Black Ridge. The maintenance entry exit hadn't been an escape. It had been a completion. Specialist had finished the job inside Kellner Forward, established the pathway, and then come to Black Ridge, where, during the response operations chaos, perimeter security had been partially redistributed to support the convoy staging and pulled the data directly. She looked at the timestamp on the Black Ridge data pull, 2,108. The convoy had returned to Black Ridge at 2,022, 46 minutes, long enough to access an external relay on a base that was managing a returning convoy and a custody transfer simultaneously, when every set of eyes was focused inward. She sat back. The operation had been planned in advance, not improvised in response to the Kellner Forward resolution planned before it, with Kellner Forward as the mechanism and Black Ridge as the actual target, which meant Varen's network had known about the Kellner Forward timing in advance, which meant there was a source. She picked up the phone and called Okafor. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was awake too. Communications specialist who was at Kellner Forward, she said. I need to know who scheduled the hostile team's arrival window. Pause. That would be in the site commander's duty logs, Okafor said. I know. Get me the duty logs for the 72 hours prior to the hostage situation. Personnel rotation schedules, visitor logs, maintenance service appointments. That's going to take a few hours. I have 90 minutes before the 600 brief. Do what you can. She heard him moving. Claire, he said. And he almost never used her first name. Yeah. If there's a source inside the rotation schedule mines. I know, she said. That's a different problem than a hostile network with a data package. I know that too. She hung up. She looked at the analysis on her desk. She looked at the logbook. She looked at the pale pre-dawn through her window. The same quality of light she'd been working in when she'd settled onto the generator housing at Kellner Forward with a rifle and a problem she wasn't supposed to solve. She thought about Park and Reyes, the two officers who'd come before her at Black Ridge. She thought about Okafor, 11 months in, staying because somebody had to. She thought about the specialist with the too precise movement and the wrong jacket, walking through a maintenance door that had been left open from the inside. She thought about Ward's question in the stairwell. What do you want out of this? She'd given him the operational answer, because that was the honest answer for that moment. But there was another answer she hadn't given, because it wasn't the kind of thing you said to someone you'd known for 2 weeks in a stairwell at a military installation, where people were still being carried out of buildings on stretchers. What she wanted was to finish the thing she'd started. Not the shot, not the repositioning, not even the Kellner Forward mission, the larger thing, the thing that had been in motion since the moment she'd walked in to that briefing room with a stripped file and two men who'd seen a pawn. She wanted to know who had built the board. The 600 brief was the most organized meeting she had attended at Blackridge. Cross ran it with the same competence he always had, but something in the structure was different, less performance, more function. He'd set up the room the night before, apparently, or had someone set it up. Because the maps were current, the communications logs were pre-staged, and the signal intercept analysis was already displayed on the main screen with a timeline overlay she hadn't seen before. Ward's team was represented by Brask, who sat on the left side and said almost nothing, but took notes with a density that suggested he was the kind of person who processed information by writing it down. Okafor was there. He'd sent her a message at 542 that said, "Duty logs partial. Give me 10 more minutes after the brief." She had acknowledged it. Cross opened with the threat assessment, which was thorough. He had been busy since 2300. He'd pulled regional intelligence summaries, coordinated with the base counterintelligence element, and generated a preliminary network analysis that identified Varen's organization as a known but poorly documented mercenary intelligence outfit, not state-sponsored, consistently working in the interest of at least two governments that the summary carefully did not name. They collected information about special operations capabilities and sold it. Kellner Forward operation was consistent with their known methodology. Create a scenario that compels a response, document the response, monetize the documentation. When Cross finished the threat assessment, he looked at Claire. "Lieutenant Mercer has additional analysis," he said. She stood. She walked them through it, the Holloway debrief, the IR footage, the timestamps, the logical sequence that put a communications specialist at Kellner Forward as the setup and at Blackridge as the execution. Put it plainly, without editorializing, letting the sequence speak. When she got to the implication that the hostile timing had required advanced knowledge of the Kellner Forward rotation schedule, the room went quiet in a specific way. Cross said, "You're suggesting a source. I'm suggesting the timing requires it," she said. "I'm not suggesting who," Ward said. "The rotation schedule. Who had access? That's what I'm working on," she said. "I'll have a preliminary answer within the hour." Cross looked at Ward. Ward looked at Claire. The triangle of that look had changed since the night before. It was still complicated, still edged, but the nature of the complication was different. Less adversarial. Not cooperative, exactly, but pointed in the same direction, which was a start. "The source problem goes to counterintelligence," Cross said. "That's not our lane." "The source problem started in our lane," Ward said. "We hand it off when we have something worth handing." Cross looked at him. "Agreed," he said, after a moment. Claire sat down. She spent the next 40 minutes listening to the rest of the brief, which covered protective measures, communication security upgrades, and a preliminary plan for managing the personnel file exposure. Most of it was competent. Some of it was overcautious in ways that would create operational friction. She noted both without commenting. Yay, because the brief wasn't the place and Cross was doing his job, and she wasn't going to undercut him in a room full of his people when he was moving in the right direction. When the brief ended, Okafor caught her in the hallway immediately. He had a folder. She took it and opened it while walking. The duty logs covered the 72 hours before the Kellner Forward incident. Personnel rotation schedules, visitor logs, service appointments. She flipped to the service appointments. 48 hours before the incident, a routine maintenance visit to the facility's external communications relay. The maintenance contractor's name was logged. The contractor's company had a base access credential. The credential had been issued 6 weeks earlier on a standard form countersigned by a Blackridge administrative officer, whose name she didn't recognize. She looked at the name of the contractor company. She looked at it again. She handed the folder back to Okafor. I need you to run that company name through the base vendor registry, she said. Full registration history, contracting authority, personnel records. Now? Right now. He took the folder and moved. She stood in the hallway for a moment. The administrative officer, whose name she didn't recognize, had countersigned the contractor's credential 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago was before the evaluation cycle, before her transfer, before Cross and Ward and all of it, which meant the access had been established before anyone at Blackridge knew there would be a precision asset in this rotation worth profiling. Either the network had been planning this for longer than the Kellner Forward incident suggested, or the Ford incident, or the contractor access was coincidental, and she was pattern matching her way into a false lead. She didn't believe in coincidences at this scale. She walked toward Cross's office. She knocked. Come. She opened the door. Cross was on the phone. He held up one finger. Wait. She waited. He finished the call in 2 minutes, set the phone down, looked at her. The vendor credential, she said, for the Kellner Forward facility maintenance. Who has signature authority for external contractor access at a forward operating location? Cross frowned slightly. Installation management coordinates. Contracting officer signs. Base CO countersigns for sensitive facility access. Who's the base CO at Kellner Forward? Rotating. It's a temporary facility. The CO role falls to whoever the senior officer is in the current rotation. For the rotation 6 weeks ago, he pulled something up on his computer. Looked at it. He went very still. She could see, from her angle, that he was looking at a name on the screen. Couldn't read the screen, but she could read his stillness. He looked up at her. Close the door, he said. She closed it. Sit down, he said. She sat. He turned the screen so she could see it. The name of the senior officer in the Kellner Forward rotation 6 weeks ago, the person who would have countersigned external contractor credentials for the facility's maintenance access, was someone she recognized. Not from Blackridge. From the brief Cross had run on day 1 of her assignment, the one where she'd sat at the end of the table nearest the door and noted the roster of operations staff and filed every name away. The name on the screen belonged to a major who had been in that room, who had been at the 600 brief this morning, who had taken notes. Cross looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Cross picked up his desk phone and dialed a number from memory, which meant it was a number he used regularly, which meant it was someone he trusted inside whatever structure existed above Blackridge. He spoke for 30 seconds. He gave the name. He gave the credential date. He said, I need counterintelligence on site by this afternoon. Yes. Today. He hung up. He looked at Claire. You found this, he said. Timing sequence found it, she said. I just followed it. Don't do that, he said, and his voice had something in it she hadn't heard before, not warmth, but something adjacent to it. The sound of someone who had spent years taking credit for things and was now choosing not to. You found it. She said nothing. He looked at his desk. The investigation, he said. The formal investigation into the repositioning. I'm closing it, not suspending closing. The finding will reflect that the repositioning was operationally justified given the live threat environment and the protection of hostage life. He paused. I'll have the documentation done today. She looked at him steadily. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. It's the accurate finding. He said it like accuracy was something he was committing to, not something he was returning to. The operations record will reflect the Kellner Forward outcome under Joint Credit Tactical Division and SEAL Detachment. Your name will be in it. My name doesn't need to be in it. It's going in anyway, he said. The network already has it. Keeping it off our own record doesn't protect you from what they already know. It just means we're the ones pretending. She looked at him for a moment. There was something she wanted to say to him that was not tactical, not procedural, not the kind of thing, not procedural, not the thing that fit naturally into a conversation between a lieutenant and a colonel at 730 in a military operations building. Something about the two officers who had come before her, Park and Reyes, and what it had cost them, and whether Cross understood the specific weight of what he'd participated in during those assignments. She didn't say it, this wasn't the moment, but she filed it, alongside the unfinished thing in the organized space in her head. Cross seemed to sense something of it. He looked out the window. "The Major," he said, "if the investigation confirms what the credential suggests, then someone in this building has been feeding access to a network that uses hostages as cover," she said, "and has been doing it long enough to have planned the Kellner forward timeline 6 weeks in advance." "Yes, that's not a Blackridge problem," she said. "That's bigger than Blackridge, I know. Which means the counterintelligence team that arrives this afternoon is going to have questions that go beyond the vendor credential. They're going to want everything. The evaluation cycle documentation, the command history, the cross-ward operational records." He understood what she was saying. The counterintelligence review was going to pull on threads that led back through 2 years of rivalry and compromised operations and decisions made for the wrong reasons. And some of those threads were going to end in his hands. He looked at his desk for a long time. Then he said, "Then it's better if I call them than if they come looking." She held his gaze. "Yes, sir," she said, "it is." She stood. She moved to the door, then stopped with her hand on the frame. "2 officers before me," she said, "Park and Reyes." His shoulders shifted slightly. A small movement, barely anything. "Their records need to be reviewed," she said. "The findings that ended their assignments here. If the command environment during those periods was compromised, if the decisions made about them were made in a context that the counterintelligence review is going to find was already contaminated, then their records should reflect that." He said nothing for 3 full seconds. "I'll make the referral," he said. As part of the review, she looked at him. "Thank you," she said. And she meant it, which surprised her slightly. She opened the door and walked out. The hallway was quiet at this hour, the brief had dispersed, the morning ops cycle hadn't fully spun up yet. Through the window at the corridor's end, the early light was clear and direct. No complications in it, just light doing what light does when nothing is in the way. Her phone buzzed. Okafor, vendor registry check done. Company was registered 4 months ago. Single employee on record. The employee's name is an alias. Background check shows the alias connects to 3 other shell entities registered in 2 different states. CI is going to love this. She typed back, "Send everything to Cross's office." Direct. Then she put the phone in her pocket and stood in the hallway for a moment, alone. 314 entries in a logbook. And now, somewhere in a counterintelligence database, her name attached to a live investigation that had started from a vendor credential 6 weeks old, and a jacket that didn't fit the rest of the team, and a door left ajar in the pre-dawn dark. She thought about the word pawn. The way Cross had said it, not out loud, but in every decision he'd made about her for the first 2 weeks. The way Ward had said it, more honestly, more directly, "They picked you because nobody knows you." She walked toward the operations section. She had work to do. The counterintelligence team arrived at 1,347, not the late afternoon Cross had been told to expect. 4 of them, in civilian vehicles, parking in the administrative lot rather than the operations lot, told Claire something about how they wanted to be inside the building and moving, before anyone had time to prepare a version of events. She watched them from the operations section window and recognized the methodology without recognizing any of the faces. She went back to her desk. Okafor appeared in her doorway 40 minutes later. "They pulled the major 20 minutes ago," he said. "Quiet conference room C. No announcement." She nodded without looking up from the signals analysis she was still working through. "Cross cooperating?" she said. fully walked them through everything himself. Ward 2. Okafor leaned against the doorframe. It's a strange thing to watch. What is? Those two in the same room, pointing the same direction. He paused. Took a counterintelligence investigation to do it, but still. She looked up. He had the expression of someone who had been holding a complicated feeling for a long time and was finally allowing himself to acknowledge it was complicated. 11 months, she said. Yeah. You stayed because somebody had to. Something like that. She looked at him. You flagged the comms architecture the night before Kellner forward, she said. You rebuilt the frequency plan without being asked. You ran 3 nets simultaneously in the field and kept Holloway on the line when anyone else would have dropped him as a marginal asset. She paused. I want that in writing before this review is over. Your name, your actions, specific. He looked at her. That's not necessary. It's accurate, she said. Accurate and necessary aren't the same thing, but in this case, they overlap. He was quiet for a moment. Park, he said, and Reyes. Cross is making the referral. His expression shifted. Something in the set of his jaw changed not dramatically, but the tension that had been living there, the 11-month tension, released a few degrees. Good, he said, just that. He pushed off from the doorframe and went back to work. Counterintelligence team worked fast and stayed late. By 1,800, the picture they had assembled was substantially what Claire's timeline analysis had suggested, with additional dimensions she hadn't had access to. The vendor company, the shell entity, Okafor's registry check, had flagged connected to a network of similar constructions across 4 states, all of them registered within an 18-month window. All of them used to place contracted personnel into sensitive facility access roles. The major whose name Cross had found on the credential authorization had been recruited 2 years earlier, during a period of personal financial difficulty that was documented in records. The CI team had pulled before they'd even gotten on the plane. The major had not been coerced. He had been paid. He had been providing facility access and rotations schedule information to Varen's network for 14 months. 14 months covered both Park and Reyes. Covered the 2-year history of Cross and Ward's rivalry, during which decision-making at Blackridge had been compromised by personal competition to a degree that the CI team's preliminary assessment characterized, with careful bureaucratic understatement, as a command environment with degraded operational security and reduced institutional oversight capacity, which was a formal way of saying that 2 senior officers had been so busy fighting each other that a source had been running inside their facility for over a year without either of them noticing. Claire read the preliminary assessment in Cross's office at 1,900, sitting in the chair she'd been in twice before, Cross across the desk and Ward in the other chair. The CI team lead, a compact, precise woman named Harmon, who spoke in complete sentences and never used filler words, had given them each a copy and given them 20 minutes to read it before she took it back. The room was quiet while they read. When Harmon collected the copies, she looked at all 3 of them. Questions, she said. Ward said Varen's network. The data package they pulled from Blackridge. Our personnel files. Being managed, Harmon said. The exposure is documented. Protective measures are being coordinated through channels I'm not going to specify in this room. Protective measures for her specifically, Ward said, and he didn't gesture toward Claire, but the room understood him. Harmon looked at Claire. Your file's classification is being reevaluated, she said. Given the exposure, the stripped version no longer serves the purpose it was built for. The question of what replaces it is above my pay grade, but someone is going to be asking you that question in the next few days. Claire nodded. The Major Cross said. Harmon said, in custody. Full cooperation, which is consistent with how these things usually go once the structure around them collapses. A pause. He gave us 3 additional network contacts before noon. We'll be following those for a while. Cross looked at his desk. The command environment assessment, he said. The degraded oversight finding. Harmon looked at him directly. That goes into the review record, she said. What happens with it is an administrative determination, not mine. I understand that, Cross said. I'm not asking you to change it. I'm acknowledging it. Harmon studied him for a moment. Noted, she said. She left. The three of them sat in Cross's office for a moment after she was gone. It was a specific kind of quiet, the quiet, after a thing has been said that can't be unsaid when this room is still absorbing it. Ward said, the command environment assessment. I know, Cross said, going to the Admiralty. I know that, too. Ward looked at the wall. He looked like he was doing the same arithmetic Cross was doing and arriving at similar numbers. How long do you think we have? Ward said. Cross looked at him. In these chairs? He exhaled slowly, probably through the end of the evaluation cycle. After that, I don't know. Ward was quiet. Claire looked at both of them. The evaluation cycle, she said. Park and Reyes. Command environment going back 14 months. She paused. There are going to be people at the Admiralty level who look at this record and see two commanders who let a personal rivalry compromise their facility's security for over a year. That's what the record shows. Neither man argued. There are also going to be people who look at the Kellner forward outcome and the CI referral and the source identification and see a facility that self-corrected, she said. Both things are true. How much weight each one gets depends partly on how the next few weeks are handled. Cross looked at her. You're telling us how to manage our own review, he said. Not with hostility, with something more like recognition. I'm telling you that the record isn't finished yet, she said. What gets added to it from this point forward matters. Ward said, what would you add to it? She looked at him. Park and Reyes reviewed and referred. That's already moving. She paused. The evaluation cycle. Completed, not canceled. Not suspended. Completed with findings that reflect the actual capability of the people in this facility. Okafor's contributions documented properly. The Kellner forward operation written up accurately, with full credit distributed to everyone who earned it. She stopped. That's what I'd add. The room held it. Cross said, that's a lot of paperwork. Yes, sir, she said. It is. Something moved in his expression. Not a smile, not quite, but adjacent to one. The tired, reluctant acknowledgement of someone who has been told an uncomfortable truth by someone who had no reason to soften it. All right, he said, the evaluation cycle ran its final 2 weeks with a different quality than the first two. It wasn't transformed. It wasn't suddenly easy or collegial or free of friction. Cross and Ward were still Cross and Ward, still prone to the particular tensions of men who had spent years developing reflexive opposition to each other, and those patterns didn't dissolve because circumstances had changed. Patterns had less room to operate. The CI review was ongoing. The Admiralty attention was present and known. And something had shifted in the room, something that had to do with the three people in Cross's office, opposite 1900 on the night. Harmon took the copies back, and the specific quality of quiet that it had followed. Claire ran the precision fire integration phase of the evaluation with Brax and two members of Ward's team, serving as her support element, which was an arrangement that had not been in the original plan and which Cross had approved without objection. She designed the scenarios herself, which was also not in the original plan, and she designed them to be hard, not impossible, not punitive, but genuinely demanding in ways that required the kind of trust between a sniper and her support element that couldn't be performed or faked. She designed them that way because she believed that was what training was for. The range sessions were long and often cold, and occasionally went wrong in ways that required them to stop, reset, and run the problem again. She didn't apologize for the difficulty. She didn't soften the feedback when someone made a mistake. She was direct and specific, and then she moved it on, which was how she'd learned and how she believed people learned. And if it wasn't the gentlest approach, it was an honest one. Brask, after the third session, said, "You're harder on us than Ward is." "Ward's not trying to teach you," she said. "He's trying to employ you. Those are different things." Brask thought about it. "Problem?" he said. "Not unless you want it to be," she said. He didn't bring it up again. By the end of the cycle's third week, Okafor had been formally recommended for a merit citation. Cross had written it, which Okafor had not expected, and which he read twice in his quarters before folding it carefully and putting it away. He told Claire about it over coffee in the operations section break room on a Tuesday morning when the base was running a maintenance stand down and the hallways were quieter than usual. "He didn't have to do that," Okafor said. "No," she said. "He didn't. Why did he?" She looked at her coffee. "Because somebody pointed out that record wasn't finished yet," she said. Okafor was quiet. "You did that," he said. "You did 11 months in a place that was using people up and leaving them empty," she said. "I just made sure someone wrote it down." He looked at his hands. "Park called me," he said, 3 days ago. He heard about the review. The referral, she looked at him. "He wanted to know who pushed for it," Okafor said. "What did you tell him?" "I told him it came out of the CI review." Technically true. He paused. He cried a little. "He didn't know I could tell, but I could tell." She said nothing. "He's in a supply billet in Georgia," Okafor said. "Has been for 8 months. He said he didn't know if the referral would change anything." "It might not," she said. "Records reviews don't always fix what they find. Sometimes they just document it. But sometimes they fix it. Sometimes." Okafor picked up his coffee. "That's enough," he said. "Sometimes is enough." She thought about that for the rest of the morning. The Admiralty Review Board arrived in the evaluation cycle's final week. 2 rear admirals and a captain, with a legal officer and 2 administrative staff. They were there for 3 days. They reviewed the CI findings, the command environment assessment, the Kellner forward after action, the evaluation cycle documentation, and an extensive set of personal interviews that ran from 800 to 1,700 each day. Claire was interviewed on the second day. The interview lasted 4 hours, which was longer than she'd expected. The rear admirals were thorough in the way that people are thorough when they have enough seniority to ask whatever they want and enough experience to know what the answers should sound like and to notice when they don't. She answered their questions the same way she wrote in her logbook, compact, accurate, without embellishment or mitigation that wasn't factually grounded. They asked about the stripped file. She explained it. They asked about the repositioning at Kellner forward. She walked them through the geometry. They asked about the command environment assessment. She told them what she'd observed in sequence, without characterizing Cross or Ward beyond what the observable facts required. They asked about Park and Reyes. She told them what Okafor had told her, what the documentation showed, and what she believed a fair reading of the record required. One of the rear admirals, an older woman named Voss, who had the careful eyes of someone who had spent a career being underestimated and had decided at some point to tell people to keep doing it because it was useful, asked near the end of the 4 hours, "What do you want out of this, Lieutenant?" It was the same question Ward had asked in the stairwell. She gave a different answer this time because the moment was different, and the question Gavins deserved its full weight. "I want the facility to be worth working in," she said. "I want the people here to be assessed on what they can actually do, not on how useful they are to whoever's above them. I want Okafor's citation to mean something and Park's referral to actually move." She paused. "And I want to know that what I built in this evaluation cycle, the precision integration protocols, the scenario design, the support element training stays after I'm gone, whether I'm here or not." Voss looked at her. "You're planning to leave?" she said. "I'm planning to finish what I started," Claire said. "After that, I don't know." Voss wrote something on her notepad. She didn't share what it was. The board's findings came down on a Thursday afternoon, delivered to Cross and Ward simultaneously in separate offices, which Harmon's CI team coordinated in a way that Claire thought showed professional competence and a faint, dry sense of humor. Cross was relieved of the Tactical Division Command, pending a formal review process with a defined timeline and specified reinstatement criteria. It was not a termination. It was not a commendation. It was, as these things usually were, something in between a structured consequence that acknowledged the seriousness of the command environment failure while preserving the possibility that a man who had spent 30 years building something real could, under specific conditions, continue doing so. He was given 30 days to complete an orderly transition. Ward's outcome was different in specifics but similar in structure. His SEAL Detachment Command was suspended, also pending review. The ground sounds cited were the command environment contribution and a secondary finding related to the unauthorized use of personnel in rehearsal operations, a finding that referred, without naming names, to the circumstances surrounding a staff sergeant named Park, whose operational record had been improperly managed. Ward's timeline was 45 days, with a reinstatement process tied to the Park referrals resolution. Neither man was finished, but neither man was unchanged. Claire heard about the findings from Okafor, who heard from Brask, who had been in the building when the documents were delivered. She was at the range when Okafor called running a final scenario with two of Ward's operators, walking them through a wind correction problem that had been giving one of them trouble for 3 days. She listened to what Okafor said. She told the operators to take 15 minutes. She walked to the edge of the range, a flat, open stretch of ground that ended in a berm 100 meters out, with the tree line beyond it and the gray afternoon sky above that, and she stood there for a minute. Not processing, exactly. Just being in the moment, before it became the next moment. She thought about the briefing room on her first day. The fluorescent lights, the two men at opposite ends of a table, maintaining a distance that had become load-bearing. The transfer file under her arm, and the stripped record, and the particular way people looked at something they had already decided was a tool. She thought about Varen standing at the command section window in the gray pre-dawn, a radio in one hand, and a timeline in his head that was already running out. She thought about a maintenance door left ajar, and a contractor named Dennis Caulfield, with a daughter who was 7 years old, and a hostage behind a filing cabinet who had moved east when a heating duct banged in the ceiling because someone in a closet had decided that movement was worth the risk. She thought about 314 entries in a logbook and the blank page she'd been staring at on her first night at Black Ridge. She went back to the range. "All right," she said to the two operators. Again. On her last full day at Black Ridge, Cross asked to see her. His office had a different quality now, the organized permanence of a space being systematically disassembled, not chaotically, but methodically. The flag was still in the corner. The framed photograph was still on the wall. But the desk had a quality of things being moved from it rather than to it, and there were boxes along one wall that hadn't been there before. He was behind the desk. He looked tired in a way he hadn't looked when she arrived not defeated, but reduced in the specific way that happens when a person has stopped performing and has nothing left but whatever they actually are underneath. She sat without being invited to, which was a thing she hadn't done in the first weeks, and did now because the room had changed, and they both knew it. "Precision integration protocols," he said. "The scenario design you built for the evaluation cycle. The training architecture." He put a folder on the desk. "I'm recommending it be adopted as a standing training framework for the facility. Your name as primary author." She looked at the folder. "That'll outlast both of us," she said. "That's the point," he said. Picked up the folder. She looked at the first page. Her name was there in the author field, without qualification or administrative hedging. She set it down. "Cross," she said. He looked at her. "Park and Reyes," she said. When the review resolves, there's a determination that the command environment contributed materially to their reassignments. But I'll write the letters myself, he said. Personal letters, not administrative correspondence. Acknowledging my role specifically, he paused. I should have done it already. Can't change that I didn't. She looked at him. There was something she wanted to say to him that she still couldn't quite find the shape of something about the difference between the man who had walked into that briefing room on her first day, pointing to her with all the confidence of someone who had decided what she was before she'd spoken, and the man sitting across from her now. The distance between those two versions wasn't redemption, exactly. It was something more ordinary and more durable than redemption. It was accountability without the performance of it. The quiet, expensive work of looking at a thing you did and writing it down accurately. The facility's going to be better for this, she said. Not because of the CI review, because of what people chose to do with what the review found. He held her gaze. That's a generous read, he said. It's an accurate one, she said. Same thing, in this case. He almost smiled. Almost. She stood. She extended her hand. He looked at it for a half-second, the slight surprise of someone who hadn't expected the gesture, and then he stood and shook it. Firm, brief, real. Good luck, Lieutenant, he said. You too, sir, she said. Ward was at the range. She found him there, late in the afternoon. On the far end, running what looked like a personal qualification pistol, close range, working through a failure drill with the methodical patience of someone who was not doing it for a score, but for the repetition itself. He heard her coming, which she expected, and he finished the string before turning. He looked at her. You're leaving tomorrow, he said. Yes. He holstered the pistol. He looked at the target. The integration protocols, he said. Brask's going to run them after you're gone. I've asked him to. Brask good, she said. He'll make them better. Probably. A silence settled between them. It was a different silence than the ones they'd had. Before, less loaded, less careful. More like the silence between two people who have come through something together and don't need to narrate it. The file, Ward said. After the reevaluation, whatever they replace the stripped version with, will you be in a standard assignment? I don't know yet, she said. Voss's team is working through the options. If you end up back in something classified, then I'm somewhere I'm useful, she said. That's enough. He looked at her. Is it? She thought about it honestly, because the question was honest. Most days, she said. Some days it's harder, but most days. He nodded. He looked at the target again. The shot at Kellner forward, he said. The leg shot. I've been thinking about it. And that range, at that angle, with a target you'd reposition to acquire, in a time-compressed situation, the probability of achieving the specific anatomical result you were after was lower than you made it look. She said nothing. The femur, he said. Upper third. You hit it within 2 centimeters of optimal placement. He looked at her. That's not a margin you get from 314 log entries in a maritime support unit. She met his gaze. The file's being reevaluated, she said. When it comes out the other side, you'll have access. I'll read it carefully. I know you will. He held her gaze for a moment longer, and in it was everything, the conversation. Hadn't said directly the recognition. The respect, the particular version of trust that develops between people who have been in bad situations together and have found each other adequate to them. Care of yourself, Mercer, he said. You too, Ward, she said. She walked back toward the main building. Behind her, she heard him resume the failure, drill the rhythm of it, deliberate and unhurried, the sound of someone doing the work, because the work was worth doing. She was at her desk at 600 the next morning, an hour before her transport was scheduled to depart. The room was packed, the duffel on the cot, the metal locker empty and standing open. The desk, clear except for the logbook, which was open to a new entry she was finishing in the pale morning light. She wrote the date, the location. A summary of the Kellner forward shot the geometry, the correction, the result. 2 sentences on the repositioning decision and the reasoning. 1 sentence on the outcome. Then she turned to the page count. 315. She closed the book and wrapped it in the clean cloth and placed it at the bottom of the duffel. Okafor knocked at 640. "Transport's early," he said from the doorway. Picked up the duffel. She looked at the room, the cot with its bare mattress, the locker standing open, the window looking out at the concrete wall that had been the first thing she'd seen every morning for weeks. The motivational poster was still in the locker where she'd put it on the first night. She left it there. In the hallway, 4 people were waiting: Okafor, Brask, Delgado, and a young specialist she recognized from the evaluation cycle scenarios. A woman named Rourke, who had come to the range 3 times after the formal sessions to work on problems she'd struggled with, and had not asked anyone for help with her difficulties, and had quietly gotten better. None of them said anything. They walked her to the transport. Brask put her duffel in the vehicle without being asked. Delgado shook her hand, not the slight chin lift from before, a real handshake, direct. Rourke looked like she wanted to say something and didn't, which Claire understood and appreciated. Okafor was last. "If you end up somewhere you can use a good comms tech," he said. "I'll remember that," she said. "I mean it. I know." She looked at him. "You were the one who stayed. Don't let anyone make you forget that." He nodded. Something in it was difficult. He managed it. She got in the vehicle. She did not look back as it pulled out of the lot, because looking back was a habit she'd broken a long time ago, and she saw no reason to pick it up now. She looked forward at the access road, at the gate, at the terrain opening up beyond the perimeter fence as the vehicle cleared the base and picked up speed on the highway heading south. The morning was clear. The light was the good kind, direct, uncomplicated, making things look like what they were. She had entered Blackridge as a placeholder, as a name in a column on a staffing roster, chosen precisely because she seemed unremarkable, because she had no visible history, because 2 men who were too busy fighting each other had looked at her and seen a surface they could write on. They had written on her. And she had let them, for exactly as long as it took to understand the building and the people in it and the seams in the thing they had built between them, and then she had done what she had always done. In 315 logged engagements across 6 years, in places nobody officially went to do things, nobody officially went to do things, nobody officially acknowledged. She had read the geometry. She had taken the shot that was actually available. She had not taken the shot that looked good but wasn't. The vehicle moved south through the clear morning. She pulled out the logbook, unwrapped it, and opened it to the last entry. She read it once. Then she closed it and held it in her hands and looked out the window at the passing landscape, the flat terrain giving way to low hills, the sky doing what skies do when there's nothing in the way. She thought about Voss's question, "What do you want out of this?" And she thought about her answer and whether it was the true one, and she decided that it was not completely, not without remainder, but substantially true, which was the best you could do with a question that honest. She wanted the facility to be better. She wanted the record to be accurate. She wanted the people who had been used up and discarded to have their names put back correctly in the ledger. And she wanted, this was the part she hadn't said to Voss, not because she was hiding it, but because it had only fully arrived in the last few days. She wanted to know that she had done this as herself, not as a file, not as an asset, not as a precision resource or a placeholder or a pawn in someone else's endgame. A person who had walked in with a stripped record and a logbook and 31 years of choosing, carefully and sometimes at significant cost, what to shoot and what not to. The vehicle moved. The morning held 315 entries. She was not finished. The most dangerous thing you can do to a person who was to be used is underestimate what they built in themselves while nobody was watching.